Hey guys, Susan Thomas here, and today I'm going to teach you how to make a simple soldered bangle. Okay, so I know it looks like I have a whole arsenal of supplies and tools here, and I kind of do, but this really is not hard. And there's just a few basic things that you need. I have multiples of things out here because I want to do some texturizing, and I want to show you how far you can take this as far as polishing and finishing, and also how easy you can make it. So there's going to be a couple variations and things, and you're really going to learn how to solder today. I promise. It's almost impossible to know where to start talking to you about all of this, but first of all, we're going to be making sterling silver bangles. And a lot of the questions I got last time I taught soldering was, are there other metals that you can solder with? Yes, there are, but you cannot solder with a plated metal. I'm just going to start out, you have to have either sterling or silver, like even a silver or gold filled you can use if you're good, but 14 karat sterling silver, copper, brass, those are the metals that you need to solder in this way. First of all, you're going to need some wire. I'm using 14 gauge sterling silver wire. And one of the questions I always get asked every time I do this is, can I use plated wire to solder? The answer is no. You need either a sterling or a 14 karat. You can use copper or brass. Now you're gonna need a fireproof surface, some solder. I'm using some 65 or soft solder paste today. The reason I'm using paste is because it actually already includes some flux and it's the easiest for a beginner. So I think you guys will like it. Yes, there's other types of solder, but this is a great way to get started. I've got a solder pick and a copper tong. We'll talk about that later, but you do need one. And then this is called a third hand. You can either use that or you can use a cross-lock tweezer, and that holds your metal so you don't burn your fingers. Very important. I've got my torch here. You're gonna need this torch. It's actually a butane torch. This is the butane that fills it, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. And then I've got something called flux. Flux equals flow. It makes the solder flow. No flux, no flow, you can't solder. So it's very important. And I'm actually gonna spray the entire piece because it also keeps your metal clean. I told you I already have flux in my solder, but you have to spray the whole piece to keep it clean. I've got some files and some sandpaper to polish. I also have some texturizing hammers, and I have a big old steel mandrel to shape. I also have a bench block that's also going to be for forming and shaping your bangle as we go. And I'm just gonna bring a couple other things in here. These are all polishing implements. This is a brass brush, which helps get the fire scale off of your metal. This is some steel wool, which is fun to polish with, and that's just a polishing cloth. And then over here to the side, I have something that everybody always wants to know about. It's called pickle. And pickle comes in a lot of different varieties. Today I'm using something called Sparex. It's one of the harshest, but it's the fastest for this video. You can buy pickle, lots of different types of pickle. Some of them are even environmentally friendly if you like that. But all it does is clean your metal. So you put it in water and you throw your metal in there after you heat it up and it turns kind of a darker color. It takes all of that fire scale off of it and makes it pretty and shiny again. So you need pickle, it's very important. Also very important, safety glasses and a hairband because I'm gonna pull my hair back when I start soldering. Let's see, did I leave anything else out? Well, of course I did use my water to add to my pickle, and I do have something in here that will darken the metal if I want to. It's called liver of sulfur. I've got a lid on it because it's really stinky. So that's there as well. And then I have paper towels, but they're way out of the way because I do not want to catch these on fire, but my hands get dirty sometimes while I'm doing this, so I'm gonna keep those far away, but available for me. If you're smart, you might want to have a fire extinguisher. We have one down under the table so that you're ready just in case anything happens. Okay, I think that's all. We're ready to get started. All right, I am just gonna move some things out of my way just for a second. I'm about to get started soldering, so I'm gonna go ahead and pull my hair back. I have never actually caught my hair on fire, but you never know, and not a fan of that idea, so definitely keep your hair out of your face when you're doing this. And also safety glasses. I often actually use a pair that has a magnifier in them. I don't have those with me today, so I'm just gonna use these regular safety glasses, but you always wanna cover your eyes. So to make a bangle, you're gonna need to shape the size. One of the things people always mistake is they think, oh, I need to fit the bangle to my wrist. You have to fit it to your hand. Okay, the bangle has no opening on it, so it has to fit over your hand, and it can't hurt. Otherwise, it'll get misshapen, and of course, you'll never wear it. So what you want to do is make sure that it fits over this part of your hand. Now, that can get really complicated. If you want to fit one to somebody exactly, you can actually measure with a string around their hand, around this where your knuckles are, right here, and that'll give you the size, and you can then lay that onto a hammer, and it'll be the perfect size for that person. But if you just don't want to have to think about that, I'm going to give you a measuring chart, okay? For a medium-sized bangle, I always cut 8 1/4 inches. For a small bangle, I cut 8 inches. For a large bangle, I cut 8 1/2 inches. You starting to get how this goes? Every 1/4 inch makes it the next size up or the next size down. You wouldn't think a 1/4 inch would make such a big difference, but it does. All I just did was I flush cut my 14 gauge wire, and I'm just gonna use this ruler to measure it out, put that flush cut right there at the end, and then there's my 8 1/4. I'm gonna make this to fit me. And I'm just gonna mark it with a permanent marker right where I wanna cut it. And so now I'm gonna flush cut this again. Something really important about soldering is you always wanna make sure you have a good flush cut at the end of your wire. And we're also going to file that. I'm gonna make another one. I'm gonna make a couple of these just so I can show you guys how to solder them a couple times. See, I'm flush cutting the end. Now this is sterling silver. I don't wanna lose that. This is very valuable. I'm gonna put it right here, and I keep a little scrap bucket next to my bench, and I just put all that sterling in there. So I'm just gonna cut another one. And see, now I'm just using the first one to measure the second one. So put that there, and I'll measure out one more as I'm straightening. And also, I don't know if you're noticing what I'm doing. I'm using my fingers to straighten this wire, and that makes it easier to measure. It's pretty much impossible to measure a curved piece of wire. All right, so I'm just gonna cut that off right there, and now I have 3 bangles in waiting. Next step is I told you that the ends have to be flushed. Here's why. When you solder, solder follows the heat. So if you have a gap, any kind of a gap between your 2 pieces of wire, like say they're coming together like this and they're almost there, then that solder will never fill that gap. It'll always flow to one side or the other because the metal's hot, the gap is cold, solder won't go there. So you have to make sure you get a really, really tight, flush join between the 2 ends of your wire. So how I do that is I take a flat nose plier and I grab this right at the very end. And this is the easy way to do this. There's even tools that do this for you, but if you don't have one, just do it like this. So I'm just gonna take my file, and I've got that little piece of wire sticking out of the end. And I'm just gonna file it until it's even with the edge of my flat nose plier, like so. See that? So now it's flat and flush. And do the same thing on the other side. You wanna hold it tight. Don't use your favorite pair of flat nose pliers to do this because they will hit the file. All right, so I did that on both sides, and now I'll do that with the other 2 as well. So just a little tiny bit of that sticking out of the edge. And now these are ready to be soldered. So what you need to do is kind of make this into a round shape. I have this mandrel here, and I'm just gonna use that as just a form to bend this around. They don't have to be perfect right now because I'm gonna manipulate them a little bit, but just kind of get them started by wrapping it around. You can use any type of a dowel. I'm gonna need this later for hammering on, so investing in a steel round mandrel is definitely worth it. They're not inexpensive, but tools don't expire and you'll use this all the time. So it's absolutely a fantastic investment. All right, so now this is a round piece. So those 2 flat edges, of course, aren't gonna come together exactly. So what I usually do here is I take this and I bend it in on both sides. You wanna straighten it out a little bit and bend it in. So I'm essentially forming a D. And then you just kind of manipulate the wire until those 2 ends touch together. So if you put a little tension on it like that, and then bring it together, you want that to be as close as you possibly can get it. All right, so I'm gonna take this one and put it in the 3rd hand over my fireproof surface, like so. See how that holds onto it for me? And then we'll do the other two and have them to the side. So straighten that up. Now, because it's sterling, of course, if you leave kind of a lump or a blob, you can file it off. But I find the less filing you have to do, the prettier your bangle ends up looking. So I'm going to move everything out of my way. I do need my flux. I do need my solder and my solder paste. And I need my fireproof surface. I'm going to put these to the side as well and just move everything out of the way before I turn on the torch. So we're ready to get started soldering. I'm going to, let's see, I've got my hair back. I am actually even going to take my earrings out because they're a little bit dangly. You don't want anything hanging anywhere near the fire. I don't think I'd catch these earrings, but you never know. So I'm going to take those out and I'm going to put on my lovely safety glasses. And I believe I've got a big enough fireproof surface here. Like I said, I'd at least want to have like a couple feet by a couple feet when you guys do this at home. Okay, so very first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of get set up to solder. I always like to have a little bit of my solder paste out and ready to go before I get started. And you don't wanna have it anywhere where the flame's gonna be. So I'm gonna go way back here on my soldering board. And I'm just squeezing out just a little dollop, like a 1/4 inch dollop. And I'm gonna put this to the side here and have that ready. And the next step is, this is your solder pick. This is what picks up the solder, get it? Pick, solder pick, picks up the solder and puts it in place. One of the things that's hard is you're trying to use both your hands at the same time, and you even have a third hand here, is to try to pick up the solder. So I always have a little bit on my solder pick before I get started and put that to the side. Also, hot solder is really hard to work with, so make sure you keep that cool. Now, next step is to flux your entire piece. This is a lot of silver. If I put a lot of heat on this, it's gonna get dark and get something called fire scale, which isn't very pretty and it's hard to get off. We do have pickle, but the less fire scale, the better. So, we've got our torch here. I'm gonna turn this on and I'm gonna do the pickle first. Torch is pretty easy to work with. If you look at this one, it's a pretty standard butane torch. Down at the bottom right here, there's a little, almost like a little hole. And if you want to fill it with butane, you just take the little tip of the butane and you put it on there. And there's a little button that kind of presses in there. And then you press down with that and you press in. And this one's full, so I'm not going to do it, but I press onto it and it'll kind of make a hissing noise until it's done. And when it's done, it'll sputter back at you. And when it sputters, you're finished. All right, put that to the side too. And then there's a safety on this. This won't turn on by itself. This is your safety button. You're gonna pull that down, and then this is your on-off switch. So I'm gonna press that to turn it on. Now, if I wanna keep the flame going, there's a continuous flame button here. You can pull that back and let go. If I wanna make it smaller, there's a little up and down on the other side, smaller and bigger. Now, I always keep mine as big as I can when I'm working with sterling, which has pretty much the highest melting point of any metal. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start heating the whole piece all the way around, and then I'm gonna just start spraying this with the spray flux. And what I'm looking for is to kind of get this so it looks like sugar, like powdered sugar all over it. So I'm just spraying and heating, and I'm not heating it with the hottest part of the flame, just the cool part of the flame, to get this guy all covered with my spray flux. And you can see spray flux is easy. You don't really have to have any skill to spray that spray flux on there. And this is starting to look pretty good, pretty well covered, especially around the join where I'm gonna be placing the most heat. So if you can get up closer on that, you'll be able to see that kind of powder sugar look that I have all around my piece. And that's ready to go. So I've got everything fluxed and ready to go, and the piece is nice and warm, which will help my solder flow. But we have to actually concentrate our heat in that spot where we want the solder to flow. So I'm gonna show you something about this flame. If you look, and I'm gonna use the cross-lock tweezer to show you this because it's got a fireproof piece right here. If you go right here, that little tip of the flame where it's really, really almost a point of blue, that is the hottest part of the flame. Out here, not very hot. back here, believe it or not, is not very hot. And so if you try to use the flame back here or out here, no solder is gonna flow and you're gonna be really frustrated. So make sure you work with that pointy tip of the blue flame. All right, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna start heating my piece, and I'm heating all the way around, but I'm gonna eventually start concentrating on my joint. So I'm just gonna kind of get this heated. And what I'm looking for is for that flux to kind of go clear. And when it goes clear, I'm gonna place the solder on the joint, and it's gonna solder, it's gonna flow. So let me get right in here up close to where I need to go and keep going. And now that's getting about clear, just how I like it. Just a little bit more, and then I'm gonna place the solder here, and I'm gonna concentrate my flame right on that tip. And you saw it kind of flame up and then flow. And it's done. Now, and I did get just a little bit of a solder blob. You don't want to use too much of this solder. I will be able to file that off, but the less solder, truly the better. So usually when I'm telling people to first get started, go ahead and err a little bit on the side of a little too much solder, and let it be a little bit of a blob. It's okay, it's your first piece. So now I'm just gonna take this and I'm gonna drop it into the pickle. Now, notice I didn't put this in there. That's because this is steel. And if I get steel into that pickle, it will do something called contaminate the pickle. So that's why I have that copper tong. You don't ever want to get anything but your sterling silver or copper into this pickle, or it'll ruin it basically. Contaminating your pickle means it's ruined. You have to pour it out and start a new one. When I'm ready to take that out of there, I will use this copper tong to get it out of there. So one more question people often have for me about pickle, and there's always a lot of questions about pickle because I know it's a funny name, but one of the questions they ask is, how long can you leave the piece in the pickle? Well, you need to leave it in there long enough clearly for it to clean, especially if you've got a lot of fire scale or dark parts on it. So you can leave it in there for a few hours. If you heat it, it works a little bit faster, maybe like 15 or 20 minutes. You do not want to leave it in there for a long period of time. 2 or 3 hours is max, because if you leave it in there too long, like I've left them in overnight before, the joint gets brittle. And so then you'll pull it out, and when you go to like hammer it out and make it into a bangle, your solder joint that you spent so much time learning how to do will break because it got brittle. So don't leave it in there too long because it'll ruin what you've done. Okay, so let's do a couple more. Okay, so we're about ready to clean this up, to file down the joint and make this all pretty, but I wanted to tell you a couple more things that I didn't say that I thought of. One is this is very hot once you turn it off, and one of the most common burns, and actually more common than catching anything on fire, is burning yourself on the tip of this torch. And you can even see I have a burn right here, and it's just real easy to not be paying attention and to hit part of your arm on it or something like that. So when you're done with your torch and you're doing your cleanup, there's no reason to have it anywhere near you. So I'm just gonna turn around and put it way away from me. So there's no way I can burn myself on it. And then the other thing is, when that solder flows, you probably saw it in the video, it gets shiny. So what you're looking for is that shiny look, like almost like a puddle, like a clear, like mirrory puddle of water. It just goes whoosh, just like that. And when that happens, you're done. You got to get the heat off of it. So if you keep going, you'll fuse it or make a big blob, or you'll do it once and you'll know what I mean. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get these bangles out of the pickle, and I'm using my copper tong to do this because I do not want to contaminate my pickle. So I'm bringing them onto just a paper towel. I have no fire anymore, so I can use my paper towels. Here are my bangles, and like I said, they've got that pickle on them, so I'm kind of wiping them off. You don't want to get a lot of pickle on your hands and fingers, and once I'm done with this, I'll go wash my hands. It's just not something you want to leave on your fingers. So I've got 3 joins here. This one's probably my best one. You just want to test them. See how I'm testing to make sure that these are actually soldered. Because the worst thing you can do is clean the whole thing up and realize that you didn't quite get it, and then you hit it with a hammer or something, and yeah, it pops. Okay, so this is my, this is probably my best one. You see how there's not a lot of solder around it, and you can just barely see that joint. So what I'm gonna do is I am going to take my flat file, and I'm just gonna file off that extra solder around the joint. And this is a coarse file, and it just takes that extra metal off really, really quickly. You want to try to keep the roundness of your wire, since this is a round wire. It's kind of easier sometimes if you use a square wire because you can follow the edges of the squares. But with round, you have to be a little bit more careful to just kind of go around your piece and keep the joint round. And if you keep this flat while you're doing this, you can also do the inside. And that's kind of cool. You can, it's very hard to file the inside of something round without a rotary tool. So if you're using a flat file like I am today, then you want to make sure that you keep this part flat when you're doing it. Now, one thing is if you are not into filing and you just want to learn how to do this and you really don't want to get it perfect and make perfectly smooth bangles, you can texturize them and not worry so much about this, especially if you oxidize them with an oxidizing solution as well. I'm kind of a stickler for getting them all cleaned up and not having that solder on there, so I usually clean mine up, even if I texturize them and oxidize them. But when people are first getting started, and even if, especially if you're frustrated, just hammer it out, oxidize it, and go. And the other thing I have here, this is a brass brush. I haven't used it yet, but if I had a lot of discoloration on my metal after I took it out of the pickle, especially if it looks kind of pinkish, you can hit it with the brass brush and it'll take all that off for you. Now what I have here is I've got some different grits of wet dry sandpaper, and my friend Tony Thompson put them on these little handles for me. You just wrap them around, and then as you use them up, you tear off just one side of it, and then you can just kind of keep going. So it's actually a long piece of sandpaper, and it lasts for a long time. So this is 400 grit, and I use my rough or my coarse file. I believe this is a number 0 file, and I use my coarse file. Then I'm going to go to 4, 6, 1000, 2000. 2000 is going to give it a really high polish. So if you're polishing these up and you want them to look really super shiny, then this is kind of how you want to do it. So starting with the 400, you just go around any place that you hit with that file. So now go to the 6. And this is you just want to go progressively finer. And then I'm going to go to the 1000. All right, and then my 2000, this should kind of bring out the shine. Just kind of keep going like that all the way around until you are happy with your polish. And the goal is to not be able to see that solder joint at all. Okay, so that's pretty shiny. And this one, I'm just going to hit with the 400 because I'm going to oxidize it. And I'm going to texturize it. And just hit the inside with the 1000. It should polish up when I put it on that mandrel, just because of the hammering. So I'll do that on the inside, and then this guy, let's hit with that 400 and 1000 as well. The more texturizing you do, the less you have to polish. So for the super shiny one, what we'll do is we'll just put that on here, like so. And I'm not going to use a metal hammer. I'm going to use something called a rawhide hammer. And you can see I've used this one a little bit. That's the way they should look. And then you're just going to bring it down onto your mandrel, and you're going to shape this up. And this will harden the metal, which is important because you softened it when you hit it with that heat. When you hammer it like this, especially on metal, it hardens it back up, pushes those crystals back together, and makes it more brittle. And so just kind of concentrating on on the spots where you bent it. Like I can see my little bend mark right there. I'm gonna hit that a little bit harder to make this a really nice round bangle. And once you get that all set, you're going to put it onto a bench block and hammer it from the top as well, so that it's flat. And then I look at it and I'm like, still got just a little bit of an edge right there, so I'm going to take it and put it back on my mandrel and go around one more time. The only thing left to do to this would be polish it up a little bit more, and you can continue working with that 2000 grit sandpaper and going around and really shining that up. And you could also use rotary tools if you want to, or a bench lathe or a polishing. I also have a polishing cloth here, which I can hit this with and really bring that up to a high shine now that I'm done with it. So just bring that around, see how shiny it's getting? That's pretty much ready to go. You can put it in a tumbler, which is another great thing to do to kind of finish it off. Just kind of like a rock tumbler, but you put steel shot in there with a little bit of don't tell anybody I told you this, but Dawn liquid, and just tumble it for a couple hours and it'll look beautiful. So that one's ready to go. Now, the easier way to do this is not do so much polishing and to texturize it. So when I'm doing that, you always start with your rawhide and round it out. And then I'm going to texturize this. Now, one of these I'm going to put a kind of heavy texture on so I can put it in the oxidizing solution and make it darker. And the other one I'm just going to do kind of a hammered finish. So this is a texturing hammer. I have a bunch of them here. You know, it's really personal preference, which one you like. I was looking for one that would give it a lot of texture, so I'm going to pick this one. But you don't need all these. One texturing hammer will do, even if you just have a ball peen hammer. All right, so I'm just going to start putting a texture on the outside of this. And this will also harden and round it out. It will also make it bigger. So the more texture that you put on the outside and the more times you hit this bangle with a metal hammer, the bigger the bangle is going to get. So keep that in mind when you're making them, because sometimes I texturize mine so much that I actually have to make the starting bangle a little bit smaller. So see how round that is? I'll put that to the side. And your choice, you can leave the sides shiny or you can texturize them. I like to texturize mine. And so I'm also using this to flatten out the bangle. And then put it back on your mandrel. Okay, so that one's ready to oxidize. And then this one, let's just do this one with a very simple ball peen hammer, because I find that people are like, oh my gosh, I don't want to get all those hammers. So the number one hammer that I recommend besides your rawhide is a simple ball peen hammer. It's got that little ball peen round end on one side and it's a chasing hammer on the other side. It's great for texturizing. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna use this to put a very simple texture on the outside. It's gonna be a really lightly hammered texture, but it'll cover up any weirdness that you have at the solder joint. Okay, so that one is round. And then I'm gonna put it on my bench block. That one more time on. And then hit it with the polishing cloth again, just to shine it up. I think I could hit that one more time with my 2000 grit right where that solder was. And then that one's ready to wear. Ooh, that bangle stack's getting a little bit bigger. All right, so this guy, this is the one. So this is where, you know, wow, I'm still not so good at soldering. And I sure like oxidized finishes. So this is where I take something called, this is called liver of sulfur. And it's really stinky. Like I said, it is sulfur. It smells like eggs. And so what you do here is you're actually going to oxidize or darken the metal and then polish it back off. So it puts all kinds of really cool texture and darker spots in your metal so that even if you made a huge mistake, as long as you got it soldered, you can still wear this bangle with pride and no one will ever know. So I'm just gonna drop this in here like so. I'll do half first so you can really see what happens, and then I'll do the other half. But see, I'm gonna go ahead and put the whole thing in, but you can see how it's starting to turn. See how it's yellow? And what I want is for it to go pretty black. Okay, so this should have been in here for a long enough time. I've had it in there for about 10 minutes. I didn't have it heated up, so it took a little while. But I think it's about as dark as I want it. And sure enough, wow, right? That thing turned pretty black. All right, so I'm just gonna rinse or wipe that off just a little bit with my paper towels and get all the stuff off of it. And now what you wanna do is you wanna bring out the high points and show off your pattern. So I use like a 00 steel wool to do this. It's another great way to polish. If you don't wanna use all these polishing, you know, all the sandpapers and everything like that. If you just want to use a little bit of oxidizing solution and some steel wool, it looks great. It's a really nice look. So all you have to do is just start polishing. And see, it doesn't take a lot. You don't want to do too much because I want to leave that black in the grooves I made. So just bring that around this direction. And steel wool polishes things up really well as well. Sometimes I even in a pinch will use triple zero, I could say that, steel wool and use it to polish even my bright shiny bangles. It puts a little tiny bit of texture on there, but it still looks good. So now I'm just kind of going around the edges, this direction, and voila. And see, that turns out to be my favorite one. This is the way it works. But now I have 3 bangles added to my stack. So I had 6, now I've got 9. So I made 3 bangles, all sterling silver. One's oxidized, one's texturized, and one is plain and shiny. So I showed you how to do all that. You do need a few tools. The most important is right here in the center. This is your soldering station. Obviously, you need some sterling silver wire. I used 14 gauge. You're gonna want a fireproof surface. These are soldering blocks, but you can also put something bigger underneath it. It's probably important that you use either a piece of granite or marble or a backer board, something. And got a solder pick. And I'm using a paste solder. This is number 65, which is a soft solder. It means it flows a little bit faster. And then either a cross-lock tweezer to hold your metal or a third hand, either one. And then of course your torch. This is a butane torch. And this is the butane that goes in it. So you'll need those. I also used my flux, which keeps the metal clean and helps the solder flow. Flux equals flow. Don't forget about that. And then for cleaning after you solder, I used a pickle called Sparex. There's lots of pickles out there. Some people like environmentally friendly pickles so that they can dump them out in the yard. This one has to be disposed of safely, so up to you, but you choose your pickle. And then I've got polishing implements here. I'll move these over here because I have This is my brass brush that you want to brush it with after you take it out of the pickle if there's any remaining residue on your silver. And then I've got a polishing cloth and steel wool, some of the easiest ways to polish it up. And then I've got my flat file and 4 grits of wet dry sandpaper. All right, and then of course there's your hammers that we have here. You could have just used your ball peen and your rawhide hammers if you wanted to, but you can also have lots of other texturizing hammers. What do you like? The mandrel was very important. Get that in there. That's a steel mandrel. And other things I used, of course, I used my permanent marker and just some basic tools. Let me put these down. I used my flat nose plier, and my flush cutter was very important to this process. And I believe I also used that bench block. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys would like to pick up some supplies like the ones I work with today, check out the links down below. What other types of soldering projects would you like to see? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe and ring that bell, and we'll see you again next time.